Noragami is a timeless classic from the early 2010s. Pretty much everyone I talk to that remembers this anime always has fond memories of it. And for good reason too. It had great characters, it had a great concept, it had a great plot, all tied together with good animation and sound design. And to make things even better, it had a second season almost immediately, which was awesome during the 2010s where most anime would come out and we'd never hear from them again. To me, this anime had a perfect first season, so I wanted more and hoped the second season would deliver. And it did, taking everything great about the first season and giving us exactly that with even more things to love. This is Noragami Aragoto. Okay, before I go on, I just gotta let you guys know that this video is technically the continuation of my review of Noragami as a whole, so you might want to check out the first one which I made a year ago. It's a bit rough around the edges as it was around that time I was getting a hang of this whole YouTube thing, but I guess it still holds up. So feel free to check it out before or after this video. As to why it took me so long to get this one out, one word: procrastination. Alright, that's enough delay, on to the video. Noragami Aragoto continues giving us what we love about it, more of Yato's antics. It starts off with Yato doing what he does best, going around running odd jobs with his trusty regalia, Yukine, with who I'll call his number one fan, Hiyori, tagging along whenever she can. The trio are still a treat to watch, but on the other side of things we get to follow Bishamon, a war god who, as you would expect, excels at battle. She's been having a lot of dreams lately, dreams that involve Yato laying waste to what appears to be her family, which are all regalia themselves. This is what fuels Bishamon's hatred towards Yato and wants nothing more than to have her revenge. So she often patrols the streets of Japan, slaying the Ayakashi while hoping to run into Yato. While she may seem as a battle-hungry, abrasive character with nothing but the sole purpose of antagonizing Yato, we get to see a softer side to her. She often goes around saving lost souls, granting them names and providing them with a safe space to live in, welcoming them all into one big family. And as cool as sweet as that is, it immediately raises some questions. Bishamon houses countless number of regalia, and one of the foundations of Noragami's premise, and in a way its power system, stems from the relationship between gods and their regalia. A god assigns a name to a soul, linking them together and turning said souls into regalia, which lets them turn into, I guess, anything. From weapons to items and even animals, there's no telling what a regalia could become. It's very similar to that of Soul Eater when you think about it. But Noragami takes this a step further. The gods are able to feel whatever emotions the regalia have, especially negative ones. If a regalia gets bad thoughts, the god gets stung by it. And if these persist, it can leave the god feeling sick, and in worst case scenarios, they become blighted, which is like a really bad debuff. So this means for the sake of their gods, regalias aren't exactly allowed to have bad thoughts and must always put on a smile. Yeah, that does sound pretty depressing. It's something that can be handled with a good talking to, as we've seen with Yato and Yukine since they get a lot of one-on-one time with each other. But in the case of Bishamon, who has thousands of regalia, you can see how much of a problem that can cause. The first half of the anime puts Bishamon and her grudge with Yato on the front seat, as well as really expanding the relationship between gods and regalia. It kicks off with Yukine making friends with one of Bishamon's regalia, Suzuha, which catches the eye of the obviously bad guy who's also a regalia for Bishamon, Kugaha. Suzuha is a character that shows us the unintended consequences of having way too much regalia. With Bishamon really only ever having need for regalia she carries into battle, some of the others go around unnoticed, and he is one of them. He's a bit envious of Yukine and the bond he has with Yato because it's been ages since Bishamon ever called his name, which must really hurt since these names are such a big deal for them. He has his own internal strife to deal with, even having a whole backstory about a human girl who he promised to see cherry blossoms bloom together with, but since she was only ever around during summer, every time they met, she wouldn't be able to remember him, which meant they'd have to become friends all over again. Every single time. It's kind of sad, and it's this sadness he's not allowed to show. Kugaha takes advantage of this sadness and uses it as a catalyst to set off his nefarious plans, murdering Suzuha. This of course alerts Bishamon. But the even sadder thing is, she can't even tell who it is that died, only realizing much later. Yukine finds out about Suzuha's death and accidentally winds up in Bishamon's place, where he takes this as an opportunity to confront her about it. He pretty much calls her out on how neglectful she's been, which resonates with her other regalia, bringing them sadness, which in turn affects her. All these factors pile on her, making her become more and more irrational and hostile towards Yato. And thanks to the behind the scenes actions of Kugaha, who is actually working with Nora, they are able to kidnap Hiyori, framing it on Bishamon and making her the damsel in distress once again. This leads to Yato and Bishamon's clash as they both fight under misconceptions. This is all according to Kugaha's plan. His goal is to get Yato to kill her in her weakened state, which will lead to her being reborn. This is where we get even more insight into the world of Noragami. The gods aren't exactly all powerful. In fact, most of their power comes from their regalia and their worshippers. This just shows how much each side relies on the other. And the gods, while they're technically immortal, they can still be killed. However, when they die, they get reborn almost immediately, thanks to the people of the real world who still believe in them. And when they're reborn, they basically start out as a blank slate. They have no memories of their previous life or how they did things, so they may have different personalities, ideals, and missions. Gods being reborn is a pretty normal thing in the world, and it brings forth some other questions you might have about Yato. Since he's struggling to remain relevant, what would happen if he actually died? Would he just cease to exist? It also shows you just how tough he is. He's been around for centuries, never once ever experiencing reincarnation, so to us the audience, there's a sense of mortality to him. We also get to see Yukine show just how devoted he is to Yato and risk his name to protect Yato, which in turn causes him to evolve. So now instead of one katana, Yato has two. This is really cool as it continues to show you just how much weight the names have on regalia. Yukine didn't risk his life, but his name. So we see Bishamon finally going over the edge and losing all reason. About to deliver the final blow to Yato before her most trusted regalia and guiding voice, Kazuma steps in. This breaks her and finally brings her to her senses. But before things can finally settle down, Kugaha shows up, tells her how much of a bad person she's been and basically says she should off herself. Yato steps in, smacks him around a bit before Bishamon finally gains her composure to face him directly. She somewhat understands him and kind of feels for him because his intentions, while misguided, came from the purest parts of his heart. But she can't accept him anymore and so revokes his name, banishing him back to the real world. This concludes the Bishamon arc. She comes to see the error of her ways and comes to terms with the fact that she can't save everyone, and so decides that moving forward, she'll settle her grudge with Yato and aims to have a better relationship with her regalia, while trying to be a better god. And that ends the first half of the second season, taking up 6 episodes in total. We see a return to form for the main gang as Hiyori has now gotten into high school and Yato and Yukine are still taking any odd jobs that come up. But in the middle of it all, we get introduced to a new god, the god of fortune, Ebisu. He's caught wind of Yukine's transformation for Yato and as such offers to buy Yukine off him, but obviously Yato says no. He still dumps a lot of money on him, telling him to use it to build himself a shrine. You see, because of the kind of minor god he is, Yato has never had a shrine. In fact, he grew up being told he'd never need one. But he turns down the money because he wants to get a shrine with his own money. But Yato being Yato still keeps the money. Sadly, by the end of the day, in order to solve an Ayakashi problem, he's forced to give up all the money. This leads to what might be the most touching scene in the entire show. Hiyori presents Yato with his very own mini shrine. And this brings tears to his eyes. After centuries, he finally gets his first shrine. There's something so real about this scene to me. Up until now, Yato has been a character who we only ever get to see two sides of. Either he's being incredibly goofy or a bit too serious. So serious in fact that he tries to handle things by himself. So when we see him like this, we get to see him actually be vulnerable for once. And we understand just how much stuff he's been bottling up for centuries. This is a beautiful moment. And this just helps to strengthen his resolve. He decides he's going to do away with his past and move forward with Yukine and Hiyori. And the first step to this is finally cutting ties with Nora. But she's not having any of that. She comes to him because he's been summoned by someone who they call Father. And for some reason, Yato is forced to comply. His mysterious father orders him to use Nora to take up jobs killing people. something Yato isn't too fond of doing anymore. So because of this, he disappears for a month, not keeping in touch with Yukine or Hiyori. And throughout that time, we can see how much distraught he is in doing these things. He doesn't want to be known as a god of calamity anymore, but has no choice. He finally drums up the courage to tell his father he wants nothing to do with this anymore, but he agrees, on the condition that Yato completes one more task for him. His assignment: to venture into the underworld and retrieve a certain client. This client turns out to be a Bisu, who is there to retrieve a certain item from she who rules the underworld, Izanami. Izanami does agree to give them the item, which lets them summon Ayakashi, but in exchange, one of them has to stay back. So they squabble about it for a bit before they both decide to make a run for it. This clearly angers Izanami, and now it's a frantic race for the exit while fighting for their lives. Back on the surface, due to the fact that Hiyori hasn't been in contact with Yato for more than a month, she slowly begins to forget about him and Yukine. She keeps having this nagging feeling at the back of her head that there's someone she's supposed to do something with, but can't figure out who. And in the midst of it all, she goes on a group date with her friends and runs into this guy, who gets to steal a kiss from her. She wasn't exactly a big fan of it though. However, she's able to remember everything when she runs into Yukine again, and the two set out to find Yato. They catch wind of where he is and go look for him. Meanwhile, in the heavens above, the gods have been onto Ebisu and his dealings with the Ayakashi, and decide he must be punished, so they send forth an execution squad. These three paths eventually convene at one singular location. After Yato was able to get Ebisu out from Izanami's clutches, he is unfortunately still trapped there. With Ebisu out, the heavens are able to track him and pull up ready to rain down punishment, which in turn helps Hiyori and Yukine find out where this is all happening. So things are stacked against our heroes, but worry not, Bishamon shows up in an excellent Saber cosplay to help the squad out. She dives into the underworld to try and save Yato and does battle with Izanami. Back on the surface, they are desperately trying to figure out how to get Yato back, to which Ebisu provides the solution to: just call his name. So they try that and nothing happens. But it's able to work for Bishamon though. So then we get the reveal that Yato's real name isn't Yato. So now the crew is trying to figure out what his real name is, until Hiyori gets a flash of inspiration and calls out to him. Okay, I can't be the only one who had been confused when hearing that name. What the heck is a Yabuku? And I'm sure you immediately went to look it up only to find reference to Yato himself. When I first heard this name, I was honestly kind of let down by it. But upon a second rewatch, it kind of makes sense. Yato is one of the many unknown gods who have faded into obscurity in the modern era. So go figure you wouldn't be able to find any sources of him in books or online. Creating up a god specifically for this could be seen as a genius move. In a very meta way, by watching Noragami, we have come to believe in Yato and so saving him from potential erasure. I love it. Now maybe if we believe hard enough, we'll get a season 3. But back to the story though. Yato is able to come back, apologize, and with the help of Bishamon, fight back against the heavens to protect Ebisu. But unfortunately, they aren't able to save this Ebisu and he gets reincarnated. This really shakes Yato because during that time in the underworld, they sort of bonded. Ebisu was the guy who was pretty nonchalant towards his death and saw himself as replaceable because he'll just end up being reincarnated, so it's no big deal. But Yato on the other hand wasn't into that because this current Ebisu would cease to exist. And Yato could relate because if he was to die now, not only is it uncertain if he'll reincarnate, but he'll also lose all his memories of Yukine and Hiyori. You can see his anxiety about this show when he takes the new young Ebisu out and questions him about memories from the old Ebisu, to which the young Ebisu cannot recall. Seeing this gives Yato some new motivation. He no longer wants to be associated with destruction and wants to be a god who brings people happiness. So the first step to this is finally revoking the name he gave to Nora and cutting ties with her for reals this time. And so begins Yato's youth journey. With Yukine guiding him, he aims to change the world however he can. And this is where Noragami Aragoto ends. Well, not before showing us who Yato's father actually is. The high school boy that kissed Hiyori. Dun dun dun! Noragami was a fun ride through and through, and I'm glad it was still as fun as I remembered it was. There was never a dull moment with the show. However, I did have one gripe with it. Throughout the 2 seasons of the show, it never really felt like there was a grander plot in sight. Most of the first season was just them doing whatever while laying foundation for what the story was going to be about. But even then, from the first season alone, you couldn't exactly describe what the plot of Noragami was. The second season does do this a bit better, pretty much being broken into 2 arcs. However, even then it felt like something was missing. We only get little hints of this in the background. Only by the end of the second season do we get that Yato's dad is the one behind it all, pulling the strings towards whatever grand goal he seems to have that we still do not know about. Yeah, it's cool that we get so much characterization and world building from these 2 seasons, but I can't help but feel like there was more to be had. Like take Yukine for example. They do a bit of foreshadowing with him and his backstory. Yato has seen through his memories and hints that he had a pretty rough background, dealing with some issues with his dad. I'd have loved to see what that was all about, but I'm sure I would later along the lines in the manga. We've already seen that Yukine still has a lot of development left, and I'm eager to see where that all leads to. But despite this problem, Noragami is still a solid watch in my opinion. It's a shame we still don't have a season 3. One factor to this is probably because the manga released bi-monthly, and I hear it's wrapping up this year, so maybe when that happens, we'll finally get an announcement. We can only pray to Yato that's the case. But I don't know, I might get really impatient and just binge the manga. It's been 9 years since the anime ended after all. Manga readers, let me know if I should. But yeah, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and are a fan of Noragami, let me know in the comments below. And if you want free unlimited dream toast, hit that subscribe button. As always, I'm your very favorite slice of bread. Stay toasty.